Hey, Christopher here. Tonight we're back in the African bush. From tourists who stepped out of safari vehicles for a better photo, to travelers who ignored barriers, guides, and direct wildlife warnings moments before fatal attacks. 6 animals, 6 countries, and in every case, the danger wasn't hidden. The animals behaved exactly the way they were supposed to. The people just made the mistake of believing the rules were optional. It was July 14th, 2016, and the dry season had pulled the color out of everything across the reserve floor. The grass had gone the color of old straw, bleached down to the root by weeks without rain. Heat rose off the cracked earth in visible layers, distorting the tree line at distance and making the horizon shimmer. The air carried the smell of dust, dried dung, and something organic decomposing somewhere out in the grass. Dana and Mark Ellison were Americans, both in their late 30s, visiting South Africa on a self-planned itinerary that combined lodges and independent driving. They had spent time in the days prior consuming online travel content that framed large wildlife reserves as scenic and approachable. Safari presented as something between a nature walk and a well-stocked zoo. Neither had prior safari experience. Neither had engaged a professional guide for this portion of the trip. They had rented a vehicle at the gate and entered the reserve independently, which park regulations permitted under specific conduct rules, but which placed the full weight of behavioral responsibility on them the moment they passed through. I've read a lot of incident reports over the years. The ones that did their research online tend to end the same way. Before entering, they had stopped and purchased raw meat, deli scraps, and packaged food. Footage they recorded themselves and later recovered by investigators made the intent plain. They planned to use the food to draw wildlife close enough for photographs they could not otherwise obtain. This is the part that stays with me. They filmed it themselves. Every step documented, recovered later as evidence against their own judgment. The behavior began early in the afternoon, multiple times across the first several hours. They stopped near areas of scavenger activity and pushed food through partially open windows towards spotted hyenas. Other vehicles in the area observed the conduct and reported it to rangers. Patrols were redirected, but by the time any unit was in a position to intercept, the Ellisons had driven deeper into the reserve along routes that added significant time to any response. Spotted hyenas are not domesticated animals. They are highly intelligent, cooperative predators and scavengers that function within a complex social hierarchy. In an environment where they associate human vehicles with food access, that association does not make them safer. It makes them more confident in approaching. When food competition is introduced, clan behavior intensifies. When one animal moves toward a food source, others follow. Dana and Mark Ellison had spent the afternoon building exactly this dynamic. What I find hardest to explain to people is that the hyenas weren't malfunctioning. They were doing exactly what hyenas do. The Ellisons had simply spent 4 hours teaching them to do it closer and closer. Near dusk, they parked beside a dry drainage channel bordered by tall grass along one of Kruger's interior tracks. The engine was shut off, both doors opened. Both individuals exited the vehicle, directly violating park regulations, prohibiting exit outside of designated areas. They began eating outside. Food scraps accumulated around the vehicle. Getting out of the vehicle is the line. Everything before it is dangerous. Everything after it is a different category of dangerous entirely. The first hyenas arrived cautiously, drawn by smell and prior conditioning around the vehicle. Their numbers grew. Within minutes, several animals were circling at decreasing distances. The Ellisons treated the situation the way someone treats stray dogs near a cafe table, laughing, filming, allowing the animals within a few meters without retreating. Spotted hyenas have a bite force among the highest recorded for any land carnivore, strong enough to crush large bone. Adult females can exceed 140 pounds. They are built to dismember carcasses and hold ground against lions over contested food. They do not need assistance to be lethal. When one hyena snapped at a bag of meat near Dana's feet, the situation collapsed instantly. Both moved toward the vehicle. Food hit the ground. Shouting began. Multiple hyenas rushed toward the scattered scraps. Mark ran around the vehicle. Running is a direct trigger. A large mammal breaking into sudden motion at close range activates chase behavior in most carnivores, regardless of prior context. Mark Ellison fell on uneven ground at the edge of the drainage channel. He did not get up before the animals reached him. He died from traumatic injuries sustained on the ground, multiple bite wounds to the neck, torso, and limbs before rangers reached the scene. Dana reached the vehicle and pulled herself inside, but failed to secure a rear door before it swung partially open. The clan had not disengaged. Several animals remained at the vehicle, drawn by the food still scattered around it and the noise still coming from inside. She was 6 inches from surviving. That rear door is the detail I keep coming back to. Rangers reached the vehicle after dark. The engine was still running. Multiple doors were open. Dana Ellison was located several meters from the vehicle. She had exited at some point during the night, possibly through the partially open rear door. She had not survived. Cause of death for both was determined to be traumatic injuries, consistent with spotted hyena attack. I don't tell these stories to assign blame. I tell them because the pattern repeats, and most people don't know it repeats, and some of them are going to be in a reserve next season. In the first case, the mistake was brought in through the gate. In the next, the mistake was standing right beside the guide the entire time, and still walked out the door anyway. It was September 3rd, 2018, and the late dry season had done what it always does in that part of Zimbabwe. It had reduced available water to a handful of remaining sources, and drawn every water-dependent animal into a tighter radius around those points. The Mopane woodland along the road had gone brittle and pale. Dust came up easily and hung in the heat before settling. Every track through Hwanga showed dense animal sign, because every animal in the region was moving along the same corridors toward the same water. Peter Voss, 47, was a Dutch national and experienced amateur photographer who had invested in professional-grade equipment and treated this trip as an opportunity to produce serious wildlife images. He was traveling as part of a commercially organized convoy moving through the park under licensed guide supervision, and had used his telephoto lens throughout the trip from inside the vehicle, the only permitted method in that environment. He had been to Southern Africa twice before. He was not a novice. Rangers had briefed the convoy at multiple points that morning. The briefings were specific. Late dry season concentrations brought not just prey animals, but predators and browsers that followed them. Lone bull elephants were flagged directly. The conditions put a significant number of bulls into or near musth, and the rangers used the word explicitly. Musth is a recurring physiological state in adult male African elephants marked by a sharp elevation of testosterone, sometimes more than 50 times the baseline. The temporal glands discharge a dark, oily secretion, visible on the face. Urine dribbles continuously and stains the inner legs. I want to be clear about something. The rangers that morning did not use euphemisms. They said the word must. They explained what it meant. This was not information that was withheld from Peter Voss. The convoy encountered a large bull feeding near the woodland edge, roughly 30 meters off the road. Multiple witnesses confirmed that the musth indicators were visible before any vehicle stopped. Temporal secretion was streaked clearly across the animal's face. The head-high posture was consistent with threat orientation. The bull had been watching the convoy since before they stopped. The guide positioned the convoy at a safe distance and issued standard instructions. Vehicles remain in position. No one exits. Doors stay closed. The telephoto lenses available were more than capable of producing usable images from those positions. Voss did not find the images satisfying. The bull was partly obscured by brush. Without informing the guide or signaling his intention to anyone, he opened his door and stepped out onto the roadside shoulder with his camera raised. Every person in that convoy watched him do it. Nobody could stop him. That's something guides carry with them for a long time afterward. The bull's response was immediate. Every guide and ranger present later confirmed that the animal's attention shifted the moment Voss left the vehicle. A mature bull can stand 13 feet at the shoulder and weigh upward of 13,000 pounds. At full charge, it can cover 100 feet in roughly 4 seconds. The bull spread its ears wide, lifted its trunk, threw dust forward, and made a short, fast advance before stopping and holding. Classic warning behavior, communicating that it has registered a threat and is prepared to escalate. Every guide in the convoy recognized the sequence. Voss interpreted the pause as hesitation. He began backing slowly along the roadside shoulder, continuing to photograph, continuing to present himself as a mobile element in the bull's field of attention. The correct response was to return to the vehicle immediately. The pause was not hesitation. It was the animal giving him one more interval to make the right choice. He used it to take more photographs. The pause ended. The bull's ears folded flat against its skull, its body lowered. It broke forward. Voss turned and ran toward the convoy. He lost footing on loose gravel and went down before he reached the nearest vehicle. The elephant reached him within seconds. The initial contact was a strike with the head that drove him into the road surface. What followed was trampling. Peter Voss died from multiple blunt force crush injuries to the chest and skull. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Elephants are the animal most people feel they understand. They seem slow, even gentle in footage. That misreading is itself a kind of danger. Both cases involved cameras. Both involved a moment where the image became more important than the distance. The difference in the next case is that there was no guide, no convoy, no one watching. Only a man, a tripod, and water that looked like it wasn't moving. It was February 22nd, 2015, and the Delta was flooded. Recent rains had pushed water across ground that had been dry for months, softening the banks into unstable mud and extending the reach of seasonal channels in ways that weren't immediately visible from above. The edges of the flood were deceptive. The boundary between bank and water blurred by silt and submerged vegetation that looked solid and wasn't. Sean Hartley, 36, was an Australian national staying at a private bush lodge in the Delta on the final nights of a 2-week trip through southern Africa. He had arrived with serious photographic intentions and spent his days on guided drives producing images he was satisfied with. What remained on his list were hippos photographed at night beneath moonlight, and he had identified this as a specific goal before leaving for his final evenings at the lodge. The lodge maintained explicit nighttime protocols. Guests were briefed on arrival and reminded at dinner each evening. Movement outside the accommodation area after dark required an armed escort. Crocodiles had been sighted repeatedly near the seasonal flood channels in the days immediately before Hartley's arrival. The restriction applied to all guests without exception. The protocols at lodges like this one are not bureaucratic overcaution. They are written in response to specific events. Someone read an incident report and added a rule. Sean Hartley walked past that rule in the dark. Security footage captured him leaving the tent area at approximately 10:20 in the evening, carrying his camera, tripod, and headlamp. He moved toward the water. No escort had been arranged. No staff had been notified. Nile crocodiles are ambush predators. They lie motionless beneath the surface or against the underside of a bank shelf, detecting the world through vibration, pressure change, and shadow. A large Nile crocodile in position beneath a bank edge produces no visible surface disturbance. In low light conditions, even at very close range, it is undetectable to a human observer who does not know precisely what to look for. Nile crocodiles in the Okavango reach up to 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force ranks among the highest recorded for any living animal. The strike from concealment covers a short distance at a speed that eliminates human reaction time entirely. The follow-on behavior, gripping, rotating, and pulling the target into the water, is designed to drown prey before injury becomes the primary cause of death. People always ask what the worst way to go would be. I never answer that question, but I think about Sean Hartley when they ask it. The saturated bank had converted what would have been firm ground into soft mud that provided no reliable traction. Investigators concluded that Hartley had moved past the designated viewing platform and along the bank toward the waterline, searching for a lower camera angle on the water. Tripod leg impressions placed him well beyond the platform's edge, at a point where the bank dropped gradually into the shallows. At approximately 10:40 in the evening, guests in the nearest accommodation reported hearing splashing, followed immediately by a single short sound. It ended almost immediately. Search teams reached the bank within minutes. A tripod stood in the mud near the water's edge with the camera still mounted. Running from the equipment directly into the shallow water was a clear set of drag marks pressed deep into the silt, wide enough and directional enough to indicate an animal of significant size moving rapidly with purpose. The camera was still on the tripod. Whatever image he was trying to make, he never got it. I've thought about that more than I probably should. Rangers reconstructed the sequence. Hartley had crouched at the water's edge to compose his frame. Crouching at a bank edge places the upper body over the water and reduces the distance between a person and anything lying below the bank shelf. In that posture, the upper body and face sit within striking range of an animal that had been lying motionless directly beneath. The strike came from less than 2 meters. Sean Hartley drowned. The crocodile initiates submersion immediately upon contact, and the rolling behavior that follows is specifically designed to prevent a prey animal from regaining the surface. Recovery teams located the body downstream the following morning, held against submerged vegetation, some distance from the entry point. The crocodile had never been seen. The lion in the next story was in plain sight the entire time, 15 meters away, visible to everyone, watched by a guide who knew exactly what was coming. It was August 9th, 2017, and the midday heat had pressed everything flat across the Masai Mara. Migration season had packed the landscape with movement for weeks. Predators had been working the edges of the migration consistently, and a pride that had established territory near a cluster of acacia trees along a vehicle track had been sighted regularly for days. Their location was reliably predictable. Robert Fenwick, 53, was a British national traveling on a budget migration season safari package with his family. Their guide, Joseph Kamau, 39, was experienced and had worked the Mara circuit for several years. From early in the trip, a pattern had developed. Instructions regarding noise levels near predators had been issued and ignored more than once. Kamau had noted the pattern, repeated the instructions at each stop, and continued managing the group. I've spoken to guides who've been through incidents like this one. The thing they describe isn't fear or anger. It's a specific kind of helplessness. Watching someone ignore every boundary you have the authority to set. When the convoy stopped near the resting Pride, Kamau issued his instructions before anyone moved. The Pride was roughly 15 meters from the vehicle, sprawled across dry ground in the narrow band of acacia shade. They appeared inactive. To an untrained observer, resting lions look like large, harmless animals asleep in the sun. A lion at rest remains functionally aware of everything in its environment. The instructions were standard. Everyone seated inside the vehicle. No sudden movement. Doors remained closed. Fenwick had grown frustrated. The lions were still and shaded, not producing the dramatic footage he had envisioned. He began working himself upward through the roof hatch. Kamau issued a direct warning. Fenwick continued until he was seated on the outer lip of the hatch, with his upper body above the vehicle roofline. Safari vehicles are large and consistent in their profile. Wildlife habituated to vehicle traffic categorizes that silhouette as a single non-threatening unit. A human body rising above that profile changes the shape into something that reads as exposed and prey-sized in a way the vehicle alone does not. The vehicle is not magic. It works because it is consistent. Same shape, same sound, same behavior every time. The moment a person breaks that consistency, the arrangement falls apart. A subadult male lifted its head from the ground and fixed its gaze on the vehicle. Kamau recognized the shift immediately and told Fenwick to get back inside. Fenwick stood to improve his filming angle. The lion rose and advanced at a fast trot. Fenwick reached for the hatch and attempted to lower himself back inside. His footing gave way. He fell out of the vehicle and landed on the ground beside it. A prey-sized animal in panicked movement at close range on open ground has a predictable outcome when a Pride is already oriented in that direction. Kamau drove forward and held the horn down, positioning the vehicle as a barrier. The attack had already begun before the vehicle could be repositioned effectively. Robert Fenwick sustained fatal injuries to the neck and upper chest from the initial contact with the leading lion. He died before emergency services reached the scene. Rangers conducted a full investigation. Their formal assessment identified the repeated breach of the vehicle silhouette as the specific failure point, compounded by the decision to stand rather than comply when the lion first rose. The Pride had not behaved abnormally. Every warning had been issued. None had been followed. The guide did everything right. I want that on record. Some of these stories have villains. This one just has a man who stood up at the wrong moment and a guide who will spend the rest of his career living with the image of what happened next. The lion rose because a silhouette changed. What followed in the next case required no silhouette, no movement, no breach of a vehicle at all, only a flash of light, repeated once too many times in the dark. It was November 28th, 2013, and the night in the Sabi sand had come down fast and hard. One moment the bush was visible in the last orange of dusk, and the next it was a wall of dark beyond the reach of the convoy's spotlights. The vehicle beams cut forward across the track and caught reflective eyes in the grass at the edges. The leopard had dragged an impala carcass beneath thorn brush, roughly 20 meters from the track. The spotlights picked up its eyes first, two fixed amber points in the dark, then its body, as the light caught the rosette pattern along its flank. Julien Marceau, 44, was a French national and serious wildlife photographer on his third trip to southern Africa. He was part of an organized night game drive, operating under a licensed field guide. The guides briefed all passengers before the convoy stopped. Leopards are defensively aggressive around active kills in a way that distinguishes them from most other large predators. Flash photography at close range near a feeding leopard had a documented history of triggering defensive attacks. The prohibition was not a preference. It was a condition of the stop. That sentence, "it was a condition of the stop," is doing a lot of work. What it means is, if you use flash, we leave. What it apparently did not mean to Julien Marceau was, if you use flash, we leave. Marceau continued using flash. Leopards can reach close to 200 pounds in a large male. They are arguably the most explosive of the African big cats at short range. A leopard that has made a kill and settled over it has committed its full predatory cycle to that resource. When it perceives a threat at close range, retreating means abandoning the kill. The leopard's response to the repeated flash was sequential and visible. Ears flat against the skull, the carcass repositioned deeper under the thorn cover. 2 low vocalizations. Each behavior was observed by multiple witnesses, watching from inside the vehicles, each a step in an escalation sequence with a clear endpoint. The leopard told everyone in that convoy exactly what it was going to do. It told them in order, with pauses between each step. Marceau was the only one who didn't seem to be watching. When the lead guide's attention was briefly divided, Marceau opened his door and stepped out. He moved several meters toward the brush line, attempting to clear the thorn cover and reach a direct angle on the carcass. The geometry of what he walked into was the problem. The leopard was positioned between the carcass and the inside of the brush. Behind it was dense thorn cover with no exit. In front of it was a human being closing distance from the open side. A leopard in that configuration has one available response. I've walked that kind of terrain in daylight. Even then, even knowing what to look for, you don't see what's inside the brush until you're at the edge of it. Marceau walked toward it at night. The charge came from inside the brush at close range. The distance was short enough that there was no meaningful interval between the launch and the point of contact. The leopard made initial contact with Marceau's upper body and drove him to the ground, delivering sustained bite pressure to the throat and upper cervical region, consistent with the documented attack pattern across multiple incidents involving close human approach to feeding leopards. Armed staff intervened within seconds and forced the animal to release and retreat into cover. The response time was as fast as conditions allowed. Julien Marceau died from acute hemorrhage resulting from cervical vascular injuries sustained in the attack. He was pronounced dead before evacuation could be arranged. The leopard gave warnings that were visible, sequential, and ignored. The animal in the final case gave none, because it didn't need to. It was already where it needed to be, and the man stepped directly into its path. It was June 30th, 2014, and the migration had reached the Mara River at peak density. The river ran brown and fast, carrying silt and the smell of deep water. Wildebeest were stacked along the far bank in numbers that made the ground appear to move. Crocodiles held position mid-channel, partially submerged, waiting. Along the near bank, hippos floated with most of their mass below the surface, just the broad curve of their backs and the flat planes of their heads visible above the waterline. Rangers had been issuing briefings at the site since morning. The instructions covered a hazard not visible from the barrier. Hippos move between grazing ground and deeper water continuously throughout the day, using routes along the shoreline screened by reeds and tall grass. Those routes pass through areas that look, from the platform, like empty bank. They are not empty. Thomas Brouwer, 29, was a German national traveling independently through East Africa. He had identified the crossing as the centerpiece of his itinerary and arrived at the viewing platform that morning with a phone and a specific image in mind, himself in the foreground, the crossing behind him. He spotted a hippo resting near the reeds a few meters from the bank. The animal was still. He interpreted stillness as calm. This is the misreading that runs through nearly every story in this collection. Stillness is not calm. Stillness is an animal that has made a decision and is waiting. A resting hippopotamus is not a relaxed animal. Common hippopotamuses are the third largest land mammals on the planet. Large adult males exceed 3,000 pounds. On land, across short distances, they reach speeds approaching 20 miles per hour. Their canine teeth reach lengths of 20 inches, and their jaw generates enough force to bisect a small watercraft. They do not issue extended warnings before territorial charges. Brouwer stepped over the viewing barrier and moved down the bank slope. phone raised, positioning himself with the migration crossing behind him in the frame. Witnesses at the platform could see what he could not from his lower position. He had placed himself directly across a hippo transit route between the resting animal and its access point to deeper water. The witnesses on the platform could see it. They were shouting. He couldn't hear them, or didn't register what they were saying, or both. That gap between what is visible from above and what a person can perceive at ground level is where most of these incidents live. The hippo surfaced fully and turned toward the bank. Brower paused rather than retreating immediately. The animal launched a territorial charge up the muddy slope. He attempted to run uphill toward the barrier. His footing gave way on the wet mud, and he went down near the lower bank. The hippo was already past the point where the distance or the incline would slow it. From the moment the hippo committed to the charge to the point of contact, witnesses estimated fewer than 30 seconds. Thomas Brower died from catastrophic crush injuries and internal hemorrhage.